Challenger, the second orbiter in the shuttle fleet, made her maiden flight on April 4th, 1983.
And liftoff of the orbiter Challenger and the sixth flight of the space shuttle.
STS-6 deployed a communications satellite and featured the first spacewalk of the shuttle era. Just 2 months later, Shuttle Challenger was back in orbit, this time with the first American woman in space. Physicist Dr. Sally Ride was a member of Commander Bob Crippen's STS-7 crew that deployed Canadian and Indonesian satellites during the 6-day mission. Challenger was ready for flight in less than 2 months, another massive first. Shuttling the first African-American to space, and Air Force combat pilot Guy Bluford.
For me, it was an exciting moment because it was something that I had been training for 15 to 16
are in an era of brotherhood.
We have liftoff of mission 41D, the first flight of the orbiter Discovery.
In 1984 to 86, the newest orbiter Discovery would fly a record 6 missions.
And liftoff of mission 51D and the 7-member crew of Discovery.
Carrying into space 1 year after Discovery's debut, Atlantis flew her first mission.
Liftoff of Atlantis. A new orbiter joins the shuttle fleet and it has cleared the tower.
STS-51J. It was also one of 7 classified missions the space shuttle would fly for the Department of Defense. By the end of 1985, the space shuttle program had completed 23 missions. Had the unintended consequence of convincing some that spaceflight, once considered among humankind's most inherently dangerous endeavors, had become routine. That notion would soon be tragically dispelled.
Well, I am so excited to be
here. From Concord, New Hampshire, had been chosen from among 11,000 applicants to be NASA's first teacher in space.
I would like to humanize the space age by giving a perspective from a non-astronaut, because I think the and if they can make that connection, then they're going to get excited about history, they're going to get excited about the future, they're going to get excited about space.
The American public's interest in its space program was renewed by her participation and was eager to see her off. Commanding the flight was Dick Scobie. His pilot was Michael Smith. Serving as Challenger's mission specialists are Judy Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, and Ron McNair. Joining McAuliffe as a payload specialist, STS-51L was plagued by delays, mostly due to unseasonably cold temperatures in Florida. Rather than give pause for thought, the delays only tried the nation's patience. Everyone, it seemed, was itching to go. .6°. Ice could be seen on the launch vehicle. Despite concerns voiced by some, shuttle managers reluctantly decided to press ahead for a late morning liftoff.
6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
Challenger, go at throttle up.
At 11:39 Eastern, at twice the speed of sound, the Challenger's fuselage breaks apart from the inside out. America's space program suffers its first fatalities in flight.
God, no.
All 7 Challenger crew.
You maintain all your data, start pulling it together.
We come together today to mourn the loss of 7 brave Americans, to share the grief that we all feel, and perhaps in that sharing to find the strength to bear our sorrow and the courage to look for the seeds of hope.
The investigation headed by former Secretary rendered defective by the bitter cold. But the Commission's findings also addressed the human factor, the role played by shuttle program managers in sending Challenger aloft that day. The shuttle program came to a halt. It took more than 2.5 years of arduous engineering analysis. Shuttle would return to flight.
Challenger was tough because it not only represented a breakdown in communications, but it represented everything that's wrong or wrong about an agency like we are, where segments of the agency weren't talking to each other and didn't know everything that we should know.
We thought we knew where all the risks were and had them pretty well contained. The solid rocket boosters that caused the accident, obviously there was something that had slipped through. So did a complete review and trying to find any other things that we may have missed that may be lurking there.
When things are really starting to look smooth and you're starting to get maybe overconfident in a way, then it's time for you to step back, think about what you're doing, and anticipated that is going on with your system.
During a lot of that time, we got a lot of criticism that maybe the agency had lost its edge. There were folks inside the agency that started losing their confidence, thinking maybe we can't do this anymore. 2.5 years later, when we flew and then landed that flight, it showed that no, we really can overcome really, really large problems, really tough technical problems today, just like we could 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or 50.
Liftoff. Americans return to space as Discovery clears the tower.
On September 29, 1988, 975 days after the loss of Challenger and her crew, the orbiter Discovery returned 6 veteran astronauts to space to deploy a tracking and data relay satellite important to a number of NASA missions. STS-26 proved a that survives with the program today.
During the flight, we had roses show up in the Mission Control Center. 6 roses, 5 red, 1 white. And there was a card attached to it, and it simply said, "Congratulations, return to flight, we wish you well." And it was signed Mark, Terry, and Mackenzie Shelton. So we could send them some pictures and something to thank them for sending the roses to Mission Control. So the next flight, roses show up again. And again, it's 5 roses. Endeavor. And so this family, they have become part of our family. And they haven't missed a flight since. Every flight since that time and to date. And I suspect they're going to go right with us to the end of the shuttle program.
STS-26 ended on October 3rd. With Discovery's safe landing on runway 17, the triumphant crew was greeted warmly by Vice President George Bush on behalf of a proud and grateful nation.
You have some trepidation because it's still fresh in your mind that you're frail and you can make mistakes and you're human.
In the spring of 1990, the $1.5 billion Hubble Space Telescope was loaded into Space Shuttle Earth orbit on STS-31.
Capcom, we have a go for release. Discovery, go for Hubble release. Okay, we have a go for release.
As envisioned, Hubble would return never-before-seen images detailing our universe. Clear that Hubble pictures were not.
Several days later, if not a couple of weeks, we found out after we were back on Earth that it had a problem with its vision. And most of us were just devastated, that here we had this marvelous instrument that we had because even with its flaw, it was still a much better telescope than anything that we had, on Earth.
A shuttle mission dedicated to the telescope's repair was pair of glasses.
Liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour on an ambitious mission to service the Hubble Space Telescope.
We finally flew STS-61, which was the first Hubble servicing mission. Absolutely incredible mission.
Clearly we have a dynamic situation.
You cannot take the 84-inch mirror out of the telescope. It's part of structure. Correct aberrating light for 5 other instruments.
Of all the space shuttle missions we've flown, it was without a doubt the most ambitious flight, but the one that I think demonstrated NASA's can-do attitude, its technological skill, its technical capability, and the spirit of its people.
Spacewalks to refurbish Hubble and realize her potential to awe and astound. While Hubble servicing missions were in a very different rescue mission.
Booster ignition and liftoff of the maiden voyage of Endeavour on a satellite rescue mission.
Months earlier, in May of 1992, the 7 astronauts of STS-49 overcame initial setbacks to pluck the $180 million Intelsat.
It was going to be a very simple rendezvous, get close, bring the satellite down close and grapple it with the remote manipulator system. Everything that could go wrong went wrong.
We got up there to capture it, the bar, we tapped the satellite and the
Get me in, pitch me over. Into the arm, watch the end of the arm.
Well, that's a singularity again.
You're gonna have to get out of there.
It can be very difficult catching something like a tumbling satellite in space. The slightest touch or mistouch by the astronaut with the equipment, and you can send that satellite tumbling.
Yeah, make sure that when you want me to yaw right, you say yaw right. Okay. Any other time right is just right. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Okay. We're moving.
And so it was very touch and go on that mission, actually.
Terminal initiate burn.
After several days of failed attempts with Endeavour's remote arm, Commander Dan Brandenstein literally tries a new approach.
Yeah, real easy, guys, real easy. Don't bring us any closer, Dan. Okay.
The orbiter up to the 4.5-ton Intelsat 6.
The satellite is rolling out of control in 3 different axes at once, and you could actually fly the shuttle and fly this maneuver around and keep it aligned with it.
It's got to be the neutral point right here. 3 people grabbed 18,000 pounds.
Spacewalkers Pierre Thuot, Tom Akers, and Rick Heeb reach out and secure the satellite by hand.
Okay. Wait. Let's do it. Got it. Easy. Give it some time. Give it time. All got a good grip? Yes, sir. Houston, I think we got it.
With a new mini-rocket motor for a gentle push to its proper orbit, where it remains today, fully functional. And as the shuttle program matured, so it seemed did relationships between the world's spacefaring nations. On STS-47, the 50th Space Shuttle mission saw the orbiter Endeavour back in Space Lab venture between Japan and the United States that brought the first Japanese astronaut into orbit as a member of the 7-person shuttle crew.
The Space Shuttle has that used to feel they could never, ever work together. And it has ushered us from the Cold War to this really cooperative space program that we have with our international partners, including the former Soviet Union.
regardless of what language. Cool. People, we have a lot in common with engineers and scientists around the world, and that's kind of fun to work in a program like this.
On February 3rd, 1995, Eileen Collins, the first woman to pilot a shuttle, was at the helm as Discovery gave the U.S. its first up-close look at the Mir space station. Collins flew the shuttle through a series of intricate maneuvers, approaching within 37 feet of the Russian spacecraft, and later performing a fly-around by hand.
And liftoff of the Space Shuttle Atlantis on a mission.
7th, 1995, Shuttle Atlantis would lift off from the Kennedy Space Center to begin STS-71, the U.S. space program's 100th human space mission. It would take 2 more days before Atlantis caught up with and performed the first shuttle docking with the Mir space station. Orbiting 220 miles above the Earth, a most unique and historic celebration took place as the Mir space station welcomed its first American guests. Tortillas and fruit, to be exact, in a renewed spirit of cooperation. Together, Shuttle and Mir formed the largest flying spacecraft the world had yet to see. It tipped the scales at 250 metric tons, more than 500,000 pounds. Between 1994 and 98, in 1996, STS-76, which began a continuous U.S. presence aboard the Russian space station with a visit by Atlantis. Barely fluent in Russian, astronaut Shannon Lucid, a biochemist, embarked upon a mission that would dramatically enhance our understanding. On Shuttle Atlantis, she held the female space endurance record for spending 188 days in orbit. A hero's welcome was in store.
I'm here to say welcome home to Shannon Lucid.
By the time Shuttle Mir ended with STS aboard the Russian space station.
Tatiana Mativa, who I became very good friends with, and I remember us sitting in Red Square having dinner together with a full moon, and remembering going by, and here we were sitting there having a nice dinner under the full moon and with a lot of friendship. So it just goes to show how space can unite people, and that's I think one of the biggest benefits.
8 cosmonauts had flown to Mir on the U.S. shuttle, and NASA astronaut Norm Thagard had become the first In 2001, 15 years after its commissioning, Mir would be abandoned to break up and burn in Earth's atmosphere. By then, the process of building upon Mir's legacy of international cooperation STS-61 had helped establish the Hubble Space Telescope as an icon of American ingenuity. STS-95 would update the hero's credentials of one John Glenn. On October 29th, the Earth as an original Mercury 7 astronaut, Glenn, now a 70. In contrast to his first flight, a 3-orbit, 4.5-hour foray inside the snug Friendship 7 capsule,
The liftoff of Discovery with a crew of 6 astronaut heroes and 1 American legend.
STS-95 would
for being on that shuttle flight was to do research on aging. I was 77, we went up, and you know, NASA has charted some 52 different changes that occur in the human body when you go into space for a period of time.
And several of those are very similar to what happens to the natural process of aging right here on Earth. Body's immune to absorb protein back into the muscles changes for the young people up there and for elderly here on Earth. The objective was to take those things that are the same and see if we couldn't find any differences between my experience of finding in the human body what turns these different systems on and off. If we could do that, we might be able to make it possible for people to stay in space longer without harmful effects, and maybe cut out some of the frailties of old age right here on Earth. I really was happy to be
inspired both the young and old around the globe, but also a fresh political science and economics graduate, Lori Garver, the 18th Deputy Administrator of NASA.
Having the ability at NASA to fly him again in space helped explain what we were doing on the space shuttle. John Glenn was very, very focused on doing those experiments for both, I think, the older generation, but he was also an inspiration to people growing up.
Discovery carried a variety of payloads and research experiments. Arguably, the one most valuable was Glenn himself. Not only did he provide first-time data on what's of the nation and the world in America's Space Shuttle program. While the program had and continued to successfully deploy and service science probes, undertook a new long-range task perfectly suited to her specialized capabilities.
You've got a spacecraft that can carry at least 7 people into orbit, and with those 7 people, you can do a huge amount of crew members. You've got a huge payload, just all kinds of capabilities to be able to construct and build bigger things in orbit.
Less than 2 weeks after Glenn's return to Earth, a Russian Proton rocket departs the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, carrying the Zarya module, the first component of the new International Space Station.
Liftoff of the Proton rocket and the Zarya control module.
With delivery of America's Unity module, the second piece of this largest space station puzzle ever to be constructed.
Houston Endeavour, we have capture of Zarya.
Be added, finally allowing for 2 Russian cosmonauts and their American Expedition 1 commander, Bill Shepard, to journey aboard a Soyuz spacecraft extraterrestrial presence.
Across the world, people are very, very interested in and delighted by the International Space Station.
Payload bay could hold the station's largest components, the multi-year cargo and crew would become primarily a job for the shuttle. Amid these dynamic station-building missions, one seemingly simple and relatively uncomplicated flight would prove problematic and threaten the very Since 1988, the Space Shuttle had completed 15 years of successful missions. Each was a dedicated crew of astronauts who'd trained exhaustively to meet and carry them out. Yet each of those 87 flights did have 2 things in common: a safe launch,
liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery,
and a safe landing.
Nose gear touchdown.
From the start, STS-107 seemed to be a mission out of sorts. By the time Columbia was finally ready to fly on January 16, 2003, keep on the Space Shuttle program's launch schedule. Columbia's crew commander Rick Husband, pilot Willie McCool, and mission specialists Michael Anderson, Kalpna Chawla, Dave Brown, Laurel Clark, and Israeli astronaut Ilan Ramon would not go to the International Space Station.
Ignition and liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia with a multitude of national and international space research experiments.
82 seconds after launch, what was later described as a suitcase-sized chunk of frozen foam insulation breaks off.
Roll, Columbia.
A routine same-day video review of the launch would reveal nothing unusual. However, higher resolution tracking camera film processed overnight and reviewed on flight day 2 by the mission's ascent team showed otherwise.
You saw this little thing float hitting something and then just being pulverized. But when you saw it hit, ooh, we just winced, because we knew, you know, the vehicle's going 500 miles an hour or better. It was inconceivable in hindsight that you could have that kind of impact at the speed that the vehicle was going and assume that there was no damage. And that's what we allowed ourselves to feel comfortable.
The exact point of impact and extent of any damage could not be determined. If the foam strike had compromised Columbia's integrity, little, if anything, could be done to repair the orbiter in space. 1 week after launch, Mission Control relatively minor problem with a leaky refrigeration unit, STS-107, had been without further incident. As scheduled, the order is given on the morning of February 1st for the Columbia crew to begin the landing procedure and come home. The orbiter's belly begins to glow red as it descends into Earth's atmosphere.
FYI, I've just lost 4 separate temperature transducers on the left side of the vehicle, hydraulic return temperatures.
As reentry started and as the ground track went across the states, the ground track, of course, changes color. You can tell where the shuttle is over what part of the country it is.
No onboard.
Well, that display stopped updating. In other words, that display froze in a certain system on the ground where you'll have those kind of outages temporarily. Well, this lasted a bit longer. Then the call went up to the crew. You know, a call went up and no response. Well, I don't know, I just began to feel uneasy.
Columbia, Houston, UHF, com check.